It's always interesting covering a visual novel. This is not the first we've covered. This isn't even the second we've covered. As usual, I like to start with gameplay. Real quick, before we go any forwards. How many of you are like, but there is no gameplay in a visual novel? Go ahead, raise your hand. It's okay. This game almost got a net negative on the gameplay axis. There's a couple of things that just are weird exclusions that didn't really need to be there. There's absolutely no real options to speak of other than audio for music and sound effect. There's not even proper resolution support. But probably more importantly, there's no option to rebind the key bindings. Yeah, I know they've got the QWERTY thing, but A, not every keyboard works that way, and B, there are plenty of other ways which I would have rather rebound that, and frankly, mouse dragging was kind of an aggravation. The jukebox itself was actually kind of irritating pretty much the entire game, to the point where I actually stopped bothering to even try to change the music in the jukebox because it was just such an irritant. There was no clear all, or fill automatically, or shuffle, or auto loop, or any kind of other option, and the game half the time didn't even take the inputs properly, and just, I don't know, it felt like it was working weird with a mouse. It could just be me. So, there were some gameplay flaws. You couldn't even save in a moment. To explain what I mean by that. In a game like this, a text box shows up and then finishes, and then it sits there waiting for you to input. Now, the reason I mention that, and that's very important, is because that's a definitive pause moment. Nothing will happen. You could walk up and go off and spend 20 years doing something and come back and the game's still there at that exact point, somehow. So, it's a pause point. There's nothing really preventing the game from having the ability to save at every single pause point, what effectively means at every single dialogue option, every single choice, every single everything. You can't even load out of certain options, actually. You have to actually finish an action before you can load, which is just kind of a weird choice. It does have save options in between in between days and during the breaks, so that's not terrible, but it's not good. Now, that being said, the music does drag it up substantially. There are some good songs in this game, and it does have a surprisingly robust New Game Plus system. And the game is generally replayable. So that dragged it up to being net positive, barely, on the gameplay axis. And that's all I have to say about the gameplay. It's not really impressive. Moving on. This is what a +1 to gameplay looks like. Now, you want me to talk about the narrative. Let me go ahead and start by saying that I'm not familiar with the rest of their works. I do know that there's a sequel, which has been in development hell for at least 2 years that I'm aware of, and has just kind of gone radio silent. I have no idea what's going on with that. I did like this game enough that I actually want a sequel. I'd love to see a sequel to this and see it go somewhere. But there's a lot of things that indicate that direction, and not the least of which being just generally high-quality writing. Now, this is a visual novel, so yeah, there really should be high-quality writing in a visual novel, but I stand by my point. It's not a given, right? There's plenty of ways to do this badly. Sorry, I was just checking something. So, that's cool. But let's talk about some of the specifics. Obviously, it gets across several tones very right. One of my personal favorites is that every now and again you'll have a character say something that just perfectly encapsulates a concept. It doesn't come across as preachy because what they're doing is they're saying what the characters think, and it's perfectly and directly applicable in universe and in character. It just also happens to apply in real life. A lot of Donovan's discussions about how people will actually automatically go towards things that get the clicks. A lot of streamer chans, comments certainly hit kind of close to home. And of course, we had things with Betty about not disliking a concept, not disliking a person, who happens to be a part of that concept, stuff like that. One of the things I was impressed by, though, is everyone speaks with a different tone. This is harder to do than it sounds. Some writers struggle with this. Some writers can do it more easily. We all have our talents. But the idea is, I always talk about tone. You see this a lot in television specifically, where a writer will write a character and then another character, and then 3 actors play those roles. But if you pay attention, if you pull yourself out of the scene and have the same actor voice all 3 characters, they sound the same because the tone, the sentence structure, the word usage, the way they speak and how they speak, all of that is the same because the same tone is being used by the writer. Pretty much every character in this game felt like they had a different tone, different structure, different word usage, different cadence. Everything felt differently depending on who was talking. Even if I didn't see the name in the upper left or the portrait or whatever, I could tell who was speaking just based on that by about the halfway point through the game. So that's good. Excellent dialogue writing and excellent character distinction. They also pull what I used to think of as the BioWare standard. sad face, of introducing a character who at first glance is irritating and frustrating and then fleshing them out a bit more. Now, they don't do this on everyone, but let's just say that I was not expecting to like Dorothy when I first saw her, and yet she ended up being one of the better written characters in the game. Similar concepts could be applied to Dana and Alma and Stella. Stella was a big one. For a bit of the stream, some of you were there for this, my sister actually jumped in, and I started asking, what do you think about this character or this character? Just at a glance, And her first thought when she saw Stella was, oh, that's a villain. And I thought the exact same thing. She's not. She's a sweetheart who puts on a persona based on what she needs to do and what her job is. I found myself deliberately as well as unintentionally thinking of a lot of these characters in cyberpunk terms because this is a cyberpunk setting. And Stella's just a high-level corpo who happens to be a good person. There's also Sei, who is pretty awesome in her own right. After all, Sei is, part of a corrupt cop organization whose life happened to be spared by the fact that she was just that awesome. And Sei is an adorable, wonderful piece of fluff. So, we got that going. And I can't summarize most of these characters in one sentence, which is good. Generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, if you have to take more than a few sentences to summarize a character, then you've got a good character. And that's pretty much across the board in this case. There are some exceptions. Ingram wasn't really as fleshed out as he could be. Donovan started to be fleshed out and then immediately stopped being fleshed out. And there's a few characters that only poke their head in for one time, so obviously you don't get much with them. That's fine, because that's not really the goal here, is it? I mean, it's big on character, don't mistake me. But you're probably expecting me to talk about Jill. I wasn't really super impressed with Jill, but I wasn't unimpressed with her. She did her purpose, she just didn't do anything really stand out to me. Except for one kind of thing. We debated this on camera, too, as we were doing the audit and coming up with the final score. One of the things that this game does very well, which honestly not a lot of fiction gets right, is connecting threads. I talked about this before, especially on my television stuff. So you've got character A and you've got character B. And you can make these characters interesting and dynamic and fun and cool, whatever. But one of the things that really works is to make the connecting thread between them interesting. The way they act with each other, the way they act off of each other. This can go all kinds of ways. They can be antagonistic, they can be friendly rivals, they can be lovers, they can be buddies, they could be I've got your back, or bros, or enemies, or whatever. It can be anything. But the connecting thread between those two characters can make or break character when it comes to any fictional work. This is one of the reasons I speak so much about chemistry in anything where acting is involved, because two actors who have great chemistry, you as a creator kind of want to capitalize on that and really make there be a strong connecting thread between them. Obviously, voice acting doesn't apply here, but lots of good connecting threads. Sei in her thread to Stella, or Jill in her thread to Alma, or Jill in her thread to Dana, or Dana in her thread to the dogs. I'm not going to go through the whole list. You get the idea. Lots of good connecting threads between lots of characters, and that kind of elevates the entire cast above what is already an excellent performance. Which leads me to the other thing this game does very well when it comes to its writing. World building. Now, world building it's its own thing, right? And there's lots of tools and lots of ways you can do it. But one of the interesting things you can do is you can have people explain to someone else in character in a way that makes sense, something that character doesn't know. The game does a lot of this, but it does it very intelligently. Not only will someone explain something, but there's no big expository dump scene. Let me explain what I mean by that. So some writers, let's say you want to explain Lilim, right? You want to explain the androids. Okay, cool. What most writers would do was they would have a new character show up and they don't know what a Lilim is. And they encounter the first Lilim. They say, what's this? Oh, I'm a Lilim. What's a Lilim? And then you have like a 5-minute scene where they explain what a Lilim is. Now that's not bad. It's just one step into good, if that makes sense. How you do better is, let's say you have a character here who's like, so how's this work about a Lilim? Oh, well, this works this way. So now we, the audience, have one piece of information about Lilim. Game goes on, moves forward, and then we get someone else saying, hey, how does this work? Oh, well, this works this way. Now we have 2 pieces of info about Lilim, and so forth and so on. So the information is kind of gradually put upon us naturally, still doing the natural logical flow through in a way that makes sense. There's no as you know going on here. And instead what we have is the characters developing their knowledge as we are slowly adding to our knowledge separately about how mechanics, concepts, and understandings work throughout the course of the thing. Good world building, very good. But hang on. I'm not done praising yet. Because the other thing the game does very well is it does this thing where everything is so banal. Let me explain what I mean by that. I meant to look this up and I forgot, so please forgive me. By memory, there's a video. I think this is in Fallout 1. I could be misremembering. It's been a while. And I believe it's this thing where the power armored troopers from the United States are conquering Canada. This is in the intro, this isn't a spoiler. And they're like, gun down, gun down. And then they see the camera and they wave at the camera, hi. That moment does so much exposition. That's world building right there. From that scene, from how normalized that violent brutality is, and how everyone's just kind of completely desensitized to it, that's the sort of thing that builds worlds without even really having to do much. You get across how bad things are, not just by saying things are horrible, but by normalizing it. I'm not going to go down a list. I couldn't even try. Someone hopped into the stream and said, hey, why is this world so horrible? And I was like, just pay attention for a few minutes. And about 30 or 40 minutes further into the game, they were like, okay, question rescinded. Because that's what the game does almost constantly. There's just little tidbits. Little things like how the boss, Dana, was the only one who actually thought to bring in, what was her name? Amy, I think? The intern. I can't think of her name. She only showed up for like 3 scenes in the entire game. And nobody else would care, right? Or the nature of how the corporation, the corporation, game, was running things. Didn't actually have a patent for the troops, so they can kind of do that. Or the troops were actually working for local mafia. Or maybe the fact that there's just nanite clouds and they're currently trying to legalize the ability to just turn people off with the nanites that are controlling their body, or what you have to go through in order to deal with that, or how expensive things were, or how people were barely making ends meet. There's all kinds of little details, and they're peppered all over the place. I call this multiple brushstrokes theory. There's just brushstrokes all over the place, giving across this idea, and nobody reacts to them like, oh my God, that's horrible. Instead, it's like, oh yeah, no, the horrible death doom thing happened yesterday. Yeah, I know what it's like. And it's just another Tuesday for them. That's world building right there. And it is excellent. They do some very good stuff throughout it. But there's one other interesting thing that they keep hitting the point of, and that's the fact that the world's terrible, but the people we meet aren't. This is a unique take to take. Actually, this is pretty similar to what happened in Cyberpunk 2077. No, really. Because the world of Mega City whatever is not a good one. But most of the people we meet are pretty on the level. At least the ones we actually get to interact with on a long-term basis. And it's the same thing here. I mean, honestly, there's only 3 people that I consider to be, bad. And that was Donovan, who's a chauvinistic pig, but at least he has a good work ethic and knows what he's doing. Ingram, who has his own problems and is just barely trying to recover from that. And Streaming Chan, who is just kind of doing what makes her a lot of money. So none of those 3 people are really bad. Now, we know there's bad people. I mean, Dorothy gets that across. But there's not really horrible people in the main cast. We just interact with people. Pretty decent people, actually, like I said earlier. And it kind of helps to elevate an interesting thematic concept that is actually mentioned way back in the beginning during the demo or beta or whatever you want to call it. I actually played that first because it happens first. The previous weekend before the game starts proper. Before you get a tutorial, so that was interesting. Thankfully, the viewers were able to help me out with that. Because it's just like, here, make this drink. Sure. Anyways. But they mentioned the idea that, just because... I forget the actual quote. It's like, love the sinner, hate the sin, I think is the quote. Something like that. And there's a lot of that going on. A lot of these people are just trying to live their everyday lives in an otherwise unpleasant circumstance. The economy is crap, and the government is terrible, and there's abuse and corruption everywhere. Everyone's just trying to live their lives in that. I didn't find out until over halfway through this game that the people who made this game live in Venezuela. I mentioned that because I made an offhanded joke twice, actually, that, we're totally playing a game set in Venezuela. So anyways, anywho, I don't have much else to say, to be completely honest with you. I would love to see more of this world. They do a lot to develop it, a lot to flesh it out. There's a lot of interesting ideas, like why is the rest of the world not up to date with AI rights? Why is that, exclusive thing here? What's the political situation that's leaning towards that? What's so messed up with Panama? Why are there pirates? What are the pirates doing? Etc., etc. I would love to know more, and I do hope they finish the sequel game. And I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts. And if you haven't played this game, I can actually recommend it. It does do some things wrong, and it's not great on the gameplay axis, but the writing is solid. I think it was like a net plus 30 to story, which is huge. And the story carried it all the way up to like a 70-something on the final golden number score, which is really high for a game like this. So make of that what you will. Otherwise, hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time.